What happened to Tessa Richey is one of those stories that stays with you. It's not just because of the crime itself, though that's horrifying enough, but because of everything surrounding it. The missed opportunities. The silence. The heartbreak of a mother does what the police should have done. This is the story of a bright, loving young woman who disappeared after a night out in Toronto. And the shocking truth that surfaced days later. But before we get into this chilling case, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more real-life crime stories. And hey, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. Now, let's rewind to where it all began. It was late November 2017, a chilly Friday night in Toronto. 22-year-old Tessa Richey was out with her close friend Riley, trying to shake off her recent breakup. The two of them decided to hit up Cruise and Tango, a lively LGBTQ bar in Church and Wellesley Village. For Tess, who was bisexual, it was a safe, familiar place, somewhere she could be herself, let loose, and just breathe. Tess was that kind of person, genuine, kind, full of energy. Born in 1994 in North Bay, Ontario, she grew up in a large, loving family. She adored animals, especially her two dogs Phil and Pearl, and had a soft spot for anyone who needed help. That compassion led her to study therapy for abused women and children at George Brown College. She wasn't just learning how to support others, she was living it. Fighting for women's rights. Volunteering. Speaking out. And she wasn't afraid to show her own struggles, either. Tess had a YouTube channel, and some of her videos took a raw, personal turn. In one video, she opened up about being abused by a former boyfriend, how it changed her, how ashamed she felt, and how hard it was to reclaim her voice. Watching her speak was like watching someone rebuild themselves in real time. There was pain in her voice, but also strength. She wasn't hiding. She was showing other women they weren't alone. Later, Tess shifts her goals a bit. After deciding the therapy program wasn't quite right for her, she moved on to study flight services at Seneca College. She wanted to be a flight attendant, travel the world, meet people, experience life from the clouds. She also thought about spending a summer tree planted out west, reconnecting with nature. Tess was always searching, always dreaming. That's what makes what happened next so devastating. When Tess and Riley arrived at Cruise and Tango that night, the vibe was normal. Loud music. Laughter. Drinks flowing. The night moved on. And then they met him. His name is Kalen Schlatter. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about Kalen. He was just 21, said he was out alone, and described himself as gay. He struck up a conversation with Tess and Riley. He was friendly, funny enough, and seemed to fit in, but something about him was off. Riley would later say that he got a strange feeling from Kalen, like he was trying a little too hard, like something about him didn't match his words. Still, when the night wrapped up around 1:30 a.m., all three of them left the club together. Riley, who wasn't feeling great, called an Uber and headed home. Tess stayed behind with Kalen. She'd ordered her own ride too, but she never got in it. That was the last time anyone saw Tess alive. Hours later, her sister Rachel started to worry. Tess was the kind of person who always kept people updated, where she was, who she was with, when she'd be home. But that morning, her phone was silent. No texts. No posts. Nothing. It didn't feel right. By that afternoon, Rachel was panicking. She texted. She called. Nothing. So she picked up the phone and called their mom, Christine. Within hours, Christine was on the road driving 4 hours from North Bay to Toronto to help find her daughter. When they contacted police, they hoped for help. But instead, they hit a wall. Officers told them not to worry. Tess was probably just blowing off steam after a breakup. Maybe she was lying low somewhere, trying to clear her head. That kind of assumption? It costs Tessa's family precious time. Meanwhile, Christine wasn't waiting. She knew her daughter. She knew something was wrong, so she did what any mother would do. She started her own search. Christine walked the downtown streets alone, cold, desperate. She knocked on the doors. Asked local businesses for security footage. Posted flyers. She wasn't just worried anymore. She was disenchanted, and she was right to be. Days passed. Still no word from Tess. Still no action from the police. Still no sign of her on surveillance. 4 days later, on November 29th, Christine went back to Church Street, to the area where Tess was last seen. It was early. Cold. Barely light out. She wandered near a construction site on Dundonald Street, a quiet residential block just minutes from the bar. Something about it made her stop. She noticed a small stairwell that led down to a basement-level apartment. She hesitated. Then walked down, and there, lying at the bottom of those stairs, was Tess. Her own mother had found her, not the police. Not a detective. Not a volunteer. Her mother, Tess, had been strangled to death. Murdered. And her body had been lying there in plain sight for 4 days. Just steps away from where she was last seen. She never even made it into that Uber. The police had missed it all. That moment, that image of a mother discovering her daughter's body, will haunt Christine for the rest of her life. It was the kind of thing no parent should ever have to experience. And yet, here she was living it. Worse yet, surveillance footage will soon show that Tess and Kaylin had walked to that very spot together. Around 4 a.m., they'd been seen on camera in the laneway behind the building. Minutes later, Tess disappeared, and Kaylin? He walked away like nothing happened. So here we are. A young woman full of life, gone. A family shattered. And a city starting to realize that something had gone horribly, unforgivably wrong. Tess Richey's body had been found by her own mother, lying just outside the very area police were supposed to be canvassing. 4 days had passed. 4 days where nothing happened. Where investigators dismissed her disappearance as just another case of blowing off steam. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was murder. And now, it was time for answers. Let's talk about the man who was with her that night. Kaylin Schlatter was 21 years old when he met Tess that night at Cruise in Tango. He'd told Tess and her friend Riley that he was gay, out partying alone, just looking for a good time. But that wasn't the truth, not even close. Turns out, Kaylin had a long history of predatory behavior, especially toward women. He was known for lurking around nightclubs, flirting aggressively, and pushing boundaries. Women described him as creepy, pushy, and someone who didn't take no for an answer. In fact, in the months leading up to Tessa's murder, police had received multiple complaints about Kaylin. Women reported being followed, being touched offensively, being pressured. But none of those complaints led to charges. He slipped through the cracks. Again, on the night of November 24, 2017, Kaylin saw Tess as a target. He inserted himself into her night, laughing, charming, playing the part of the friendly, non-threatening guy. And when her friend Riley left, he moved in closer. That's when he made his move. Once Tess was reported missing, and especially after Christine found her body, police began pulling surveillance footage from surrounding areas. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture. At 4:11 a.m., Tess and Kaylin were captured walking arm in arm down Dundonald Street. They seemed relaxed, laughing, talking. A few minutes later, they were spotted again, now in the alleyway behind a nearby apartment building. Then, Tess is no longer seen, but Kaylin, he walks out of that alley alone at 5:05 a.m., calm, casual. He adjusts his coat. Keeps walking. That hour was crucial. At that time, Tess was murdered, strangled, her body dumped in a stairwell just steps away, and the killer disappeared into the early morning city like nothing had happened. After the footage was reviewed and more evidence was gathered, police zeroed in on Kaylin Schlatter. But they didn't arrest him right away. They were watching him closely, and what they saw only added to the case. Just a few weeks after Tess's death, Kaylin was back out at another Toronto nightclub, partying and dancing like nothing had ever happened. That same night, an undercover officer approached him. They struck up a conversation. Kaylin, clearly trying to impress, started bragging. He claimed he'd had sex with a girl who'd just died to Tess. He even said that police couldn't charge him because there was no semen, so they had nothing. But Kaylin didn't know something very important. He was wrong. Forensic experts had found DNA on Tessa's pants and under her fingernails. And it matched only one person, Kaylin Schlatter. His arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable, helped police finally get what they needed. He was arrested on February 4, 2018, and charged with second-degree murder, but journalists weren't done. As the evidence continued piling up, the charge was upgraded to first-degree murder. Why? Because the crime wasn't just violent, it was calculated. In 2020, after years of delays, investigation, and grief, the trial of Kaylin Schlatter began in Toronto. The prosecution laid everything out: the surveillance footage, the forensic evidence, the timeline, and the disturbing undercover audio recordings where Kaylin practically confessed. They argued that Tess Richey had rejected Kaylin's sexual advances, that she'd made it clear she wasn't interested, and that Kaylin, furious and entitled, strangled her in a rage. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He walked away like it was just another Saturday morning. The defense tried to argue that the two had consensual sex, and that Tess accidentally happened. They even suggested it could have been a suicide, but the evidence? It spoke volumes. There were no signs of consensual sex. No injuries on Tess consistent with suicide. Just the bruises on her neck. And the DNA under her fingernails suggesting she fought back. The jury deliberated for just over 8 hours, and on March 12, 2020, they delivered their verdict: guilty. Kaylin Schlatter was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Tess Richey. He was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole for 25 years. For Christine Richey, the conviction brought a sense of closure, but it didn't heal the wound. Her daughter was still gone, and the system that should have protected her had failed. Christine turned her pain into purpose. She began speaking out about victim blaming, about police inaction, about how quickly people dismiss missing women, especially those from marginalized groups. She pushed for change in how missing person cases are handled. She wanted other families to be heard, to be believed, to be seriously taken from the first phone call, not after it's too late. And slowly, her voice made waves. Tessa's murder didn't just affect her family. It rocked the entire church and Wellesley community. For many in the LGBTQ space, it reinforces a painful truth that queer people, women, especially bisexual women, are too often erased, ignored, or silenced. Memorials were held. Streets filled with candlelight vigils. Murals were painted in her honor. And every single person who spoke about her said the same thing: Tess was light. Warmth. A soul that makes others feel safe. Her loss wasn't just personal, it was collective. Tess Richey should have had decades ahead of her. A future filled with travel, love, laughter, maybe even a career among the clouds like she dreamed. But instead, her life was cut short in the cruelest, most senseless way by someone who couldn't handle rejection, and in the aftermath, what remained wasn't just grief, it was rage. It was unbelievable. And it was a fire that refused to go out. Let's talk about what changed. And what didn't. Here's the part that's tough to swallow. Tess wasn't just failed by a stranger in an alley, she was failed by a system that's supposed to protect people like her. Let's be honest. When Christine Richey drove 4 hours to Toronto and found her daughter's body on her own before police did, it exposed something deeply broken. Officers had access to surveillance footage. Witnesses. Last known locations. And yet, they dismissed her disappearance as just a young woman blowing off steam. Christine had begged them to take it seriously. And when they didn't, she became the investigator herself. Think about that. A grieving mother, doing the footwork that trained detectives wouldn't. It shouldn't have been her job. But it was, and because of that failure, the Richey family didn't just lose Tess. They lost time. Time that could have recovered her sooner. Time that could have built a stronger case faster. Time that Christine will never get back. The backlash was swift. When the public heard that it was Tessa's mother who found her, people demanded answers. Protests erupted. The media turned up the heat. How could something like this happen in a major city, in one of the most progressive neighborhoods? Toronto police launched an internal review. They admitted to missteps, but for Christine, that wasn't enough. She wanted real change, not just regret. She advocated for a complete overhaul in how missing persons reports are handled. Her mission was clear: no other family should go through what she did, and she wasn't alone. At the same time, Toronto was grappling with another shocking failure, the Bruce McArthur case, where multiple gay men had been murdered, and police had missed crucial red flags for years. Together, these tragedies exposed a disturbing pattern. When the victims didn't fit society's definition of priority, the urgency seemed to vanish. Christine refused to let that slide. Eventually, public pressure worked. In 2021, the city announced the formation of the Toronto Missing Persons Unit, a specialized task force designed to handle cases like Tessa's more quickly and thoroughly. They also implemented new training protocols, focusing on sensitivity to LGBTQ communities, mental health awareness, and family trauma. Christine's voice played a major role in shaping those reforms. But progress doesn't erase pain. And it doesn't bring back the people we've lost, it just makes it harder for it to happen again. Tess Richey's name became more than a headline, it became a rallying cry. People across Canada and around the world began talking about victim blaming, about consent, about how society reacts when women say no, and how dangerous that refuses can be when it's not respected. Tess was kind, fierce, honest. She stood up for others. And even after her death, she continued to shine a light on injustice. In 2020, her family launched a scholarship in her name, one that supports students pursuing education in women's advocacy. social justice, or community outreach, she might be gone. But her spirit? It's still fighting. If you're watching this thinking, how does this keep happening? You're not alone. The truth is, we all have a part to play. Whether it's listening more closely to someone when they say they feel unsafe, reporting behavior that raises red flags, or just taking people seriously when they disappear, we can do better. Tessa's case isn't just about one predator. It's about the cracks that allow him to hide in plain sight. The system that hesitated. The people who looked the other way, but it's also about a mother's love. One so fierce, it broke through every roadblock to find the truth. Tessa Richey wasn't trained in forensics. She didn't have a badge. But she had something even more powerful, a gut feeling, and an unbreakable bond with her daughter. That's what solved this case, not police procedure. Not fancy tech. Mom, Kalen Schlatter is spending the rest of his life in prison. No parole for 25 years. He'll have to live every day knowing he destroyed something beautiful, and the world knows he did it. But justice doesn't mean healing. For the Richey family, the grief never ends. Every birthday, every anniversary, every what if. It's a life sentence of another kind, so if this story stays with you, don't let it fade. Tell someone, talk about consent. Talk about accountability. Talk about how we protect people when they're vulnerable, because behind every true crime case, there's a real person who deserves so much more. Her name was Tess. Thanks for watching. If this story moves you, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below about how this story made you feel.